Hello and welcome to Leading Sales, the only interview-based podcast where we discuss the challenges and experiences of two of the most critical disciplines in business today, leadership and sales. Our podcast brings together industry experts, thought leaders, and authors to share insights, strategies, and real-life stories to inspire and educate our listeners on the art, science, and the dynamics of leadership and sales. And now, your host, George Gallas Sr.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Leading Sales. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Alfonso Schroeder. Alfonso has founded 6 companies, completed 2 exits, and generated more than $50 million in B2B business alongside sales teams and strategic partners for brands such as Coca-Cola, Tesla, and Enel. But Alfonso had to pay a very high price. He went through 2 burnouts, depression, and an ambulance ride that carried him 500 kilometers laying down. You'll tell me more about that in a minute, Alfonso. Today, at 38 years old, he continues to play competitive rugby at the highest level in Germany. From that intersection came WUAI Founders, the program that measures your burnout, your personal growth, and your pipeline, an athlete's high performance applied to leadership. Well, Alfonso, welcome to Leading Sales.
It's a pleasure, George, and a blessing to be here with you today.
The pleasure is mine, and I want to thank you because I know you are a very busy man, and the fact that you are giving us this time is very valuable to me. Where are you speaking to us from today?
I currently live in Luxembourg after living in several different countries. I know you also share that experience of traveling around the world, enjoying it, and learning about different cultures. Today I happen to live here. I'm happy, I travel a lot, but this is my home base, which, as I joke, is like a spiritual retreat. Life here is very peaceful.
Perfect. Wonderful. So you are in Luxembourg, which means we have a slight time difference. I'm in Houston. I just came back from Montreal, and I'm delighted to have you here, Alfonso. I'm sure this is going to be a somewhat different conversation, but also a very entertaining one. So I invite everyone to stay with us until the end. Alfonso, tell us about your beginnings. I know that, like many of our followers, you were part of the corporate world successfully, right? Then you founded several companies, and then you ended up in an ambulance. Or maybe I've just summarized your life in about 30 seconds, I know. But can you tell us a little bit about that? How did you get started, and what happened on that ambulance ride?
It's important to start at the beginning, but I also want to tell the audience that they're going to identify strongly with some of the things I'd like to discuss with you today. When we use the word success, we have to be very careful with it, because I believe everyone defines success differently. I thought I was successful until I crossed paths with that ambulance. Before I turned 30, at 29 in fact, I was working at Genersol, a company and an industry we actually shared, right? The power generation market, providing all kinds of services and parts. I was responsible for growing it internationally, leading the team and leading business development with both customers and suppliers. And that non-stop pace, right? You put all of this on your calendar. I would start with the earliest time zone and finish at 8, 9, or 10 at night, working in the time zones of the customers I could reach at those hours. Not sleeping, traveling only for business, it all kept piling up. You think the machine you have, your body, your mind, and your spirit, because ultimately your spirit also drives us, will just keep going? But mine was shutting down and sending me signals, and I didn't listen to any of them. Until one day, my body collapsed. And that was the second time it collapsed. The first time had been a warning. The second time, it collapsed completely. It reached a point where my father, who is a doctor, stopped me and said, "You look very sick." So I went to the emergency room. And I had a wedding to attend that afternoon, right? I had played a rugby match and I was exhausted. The people in the ER told me, "You have to stay here." I said, "Why? I have to go to a wedding now, a friend's marriage ceremony." They said, No, we don't understand how you're still alive. Your blood work is alarming. You have to stay here. You're being admitted. Look at the state a person can reach, George, of being so completely disconnected from himself that I was negotiating with the nurse, telling her, I'll check myself in tomorrow, but let me go to my friend's wedding today. Just look at the mindset I had. I was young. I still feel young, of course, but you feel indestructible. And even with a healthcare professional telling you, Alfonso, you don't understand, you cannot leave here. My father had to call the ER so they would not let me leave. It reached that point. Then I collapsed, and at that moment, my body essentially shut down for almost 2 months.
Impressive. You and I have a few things in common, my friend. We're both from Latin America. You are from Uruguay, and I was born in Chile, as you know. I also played rugby in high school. I was terrible at it. Um, I
What
played
position did
killer
you play?
and something else. Maybe I was a right wing or something. But I was trying to find my sport, and I tried several, including rugby. Rugby taught me many things, and I'm sure we're going to talk about them later. And of course, you know what those lessons are. Then I discovered tennis, and that became my passion. But we have other things in common as well. We're both salespeople. We both worked in the corporate world. We were both very successful, and we both travel extensively. I also suffered burnout, and I also rode in an ambulance. But I underwent two heart surgeries, and my heart surgeries were not caused by the burnout. That's a different subject that we can touch on later. But the warning signs were there, and emotionally, you have to listen to them. We're going to talk about that, and that leads directly to my question. What signs did you see? Or were you insistent, I'm fine, I feel fine, even though your blood works show that you were on the verge of collapse? What signs did the people around you see, your family, your father, who's a doctor? What signs made them realize that you were truly falling apart?
These signs are persistent, George, and surely you, as well as everyone listening to us, have some, if not all of them. I'm going to name 7 that I believe are the most important or the highest priority, and I'll give them in an order that matters to me. First, sleep. You sleep, but you don't rest. You wake up tired. That is not normal. It's a very clear sign, sleeping and waking up tired over and over again. I often hear, it's because I have children, or it's because of this other thing. Well, in my case, I don't have children. My first child will be here very soon. But it is a very clear sign. If someone is not sleeping well today, it is a very clear sign that their nervous system is occupied or worried, preoccupied. The second sign was that on Sundays, I felt pressure in my chest because Monday was coming, and a huge number of responsibilities would start racing through my mind. It was eating me alive. Had I stopped enjoying Sundays with my family, I could no longer enjoy them because my mind was already on Monday and in the Monday through Friday operating system. I answered emails late at night because of the time zones I covered. There was no limit to the hours when I would answer emails. In other words, my mind was in the business 24/7. That was the software running in my head. Where was the real rest? It didn't exist. Your partner talks to you and you're off in Narnia. Your mind is somewhere else. You're at a family gathering, but you're really thinking about Tuesday's bid, Wednesday's trip, or a customer who said no and left you frustrated. Everything irritates you. At that point, you've reached a somewhat heavier stage. Everything irritates you. Someone who never used to irritate you suddenly does. These things happen with your partner, your child, or your sibling. Now, given who we are, and I'll speak from a more masculine perspective because we have a different energy from feminine energy, we still perform. We get up, we remain functional, we lead the teams we're responsible for, we travel, and perhaps we close deals. But we're operating on a system that is far below our actual capacity. And the biggest lie, which I'll give you as number 7, is the lie we tell ourselves. Next quarter, I'll slow down. After this bid closes, I'll shut everything down for a while. I'll take a month-long vacation with my family and fix everything. I kept telling myself all of those lies, one after another, George.
And we believe those lies. The clarity with which you describe those symptoms is remarkable, Alfonso. And I'm sure that if not everyone, then at least 99% of the people listening to us see themselves reflected in them. Many of us think that the promotion, the next position, or a more senior executive role will give us the peace of mind and the calm that we need. And we keep lying to ourselves. Others think, no, I'm going to strike out on my own. I won't be a corporate employee anymore. I'll be independent. I'll have my own business. And then everything will work itself out, right? Tell me a little bit about your adventure as a company founder.
Se fue un poco natural. Yo a los
It
17
happened fairly
me gusta
naturally.
contarlo.
From the age of 17, and this is worth sharing too, we all come to know ourselves along the way, right? We have dreams, some dreams fall by the wayside for different reasons because of what happens to us in life. I knew I was going to be independent and become an entrepreneur. I decided that at 17. I also decided I would become a father at a young age, which God's plan did not allow. In fact, my wedding was canceled 1 month beforehand when I was 26, and that was also part of my first burnout. Everything I've been describing had already been building before that. It was a decision I had made. I knew I was going to learn from the corporate world. I spent some time at Deloitte, then at Genersol, and at some point the opportunity would arrive. In fact, my first experience as a co-founder was within Genersol, in the companies in Panama and Argentina, where I led those teams. After that, it kept happening again and again. What I realized, and I think many people may also realize this, sometimes after they're 45 or 50, is that it isn't too late, but it is important to understand why you don't accept having bosses. Maybe I'm poorly wired. I'm a person with a big ego. Well, it used to be quite big. I have it more under control now. Over time, I realized I could lead. I realized I enjoyed doing it, and I realized I didn't need anyone pushing me. That was part of the tremendous growth I've experienced. I started in the energy industry. Within the company, I was an intrapreneur, meaning that you can launch new projects, take on new challenges, and open new markets from inside a company. You're naturally undertaking entrepreneurial work. More recently, I moved into technology companies, one involving machine learning and another in insurtech. So the commercial skills and constant drive to innovate that I brought with me were applied and replicated in different industries. Of course, of all the companies I had to close two, and two resulted in personal bankruptcies. So this is not a story in which everything we did was successful. There were several major setbacks along the way, and they became learning experiences, George.
And did you sleep any better or worse than when you were an employee?
Te puedo decir que peor. Pero con una energía
I can tell you I slept worse, but I had a different kind of energy. I woke up with a sense of absolute creative drive towards something I wanted, or wanted at that time. I traded my time to fulfill dreams. For example, democratizing insurance for people who were not well served by the fine print, and democratizing certain services for the industrial world. The reality is that your chest still tightens, because payroll has to be met. It tightens just the same because if you don't move, you don't sell. And if you don't sell, you have to close the company and lay people off. In fact, all of that happened to us in 2020 with a company we had at Sinergias. Then 2020 arrived, and George, everyone listening surely has several stories from that year. Suddenly, for an entrepreneur who made a living traveling and selling internationally, practically all of it shut down overnight. What do you do with your team? There is an emotional burden you carry as a leader, and it weighs heavily. I can say I reached the threshold of a third burnout, although it wasn't burnout, it was depression, and that happened in 2020. The emotional stress combined with a physical stress, and I almost collapsed again. I did collapse, but in a different way. So I would say, George, that you have surely experienced this as well, because you've had to develop many markets and many teams for different companies, and you know your decisions carry weight, even if, at the end of the day, the business itself does not directly belong to you. That weight is there when you try to sleep. I can tell you that even today, I have trouble sleeping. I've improved tremendously, but sometimes my chest still tightens because today, from a different perspective, I want to change leaders' lives. And sometimes, well, their stories are very moving. So the emotion is still there, the same spark is still there, but it takes a different form.
And speaking of the leaders you work with, you meet with many leaders, sales leaders, corporate leaders, and others, right? And you have discovered, or perhaps confirmed, your theory that what you have experienced and felt is not unusual. Instead, it is extremely common and happens to many people. can you venture a number in percentage terms? What proportion of successful leaders, whether corporate executives or entrepreneurs, do you believe are experiencing these symptoms and failing to pay attention to them?
Te voy a dar un dato. Te voy a dar un dato
I'll give you a figure from personal experience and another from studies conducted especially in the United States. There are studies in Europe as well. They are different, and each study has its own findings. These are fairly recent studies. We're talking about 2024, and my own personal figures continue to evolve over time. The first US study I'll mention is from 2024. Nearly 92%, we're talking about a little over 91%, of top management worldwide, in this case with a strong focus on the United States, has some or several symptoms of burnout. And nearly that entire 92% is operating at less than 60% of its cognitive capacity. Burnout can reach the point where you make decisions as though you were drunk. Scientific studies show that sleeping poorly and making decisions after working more than 12 hours is practically the same as making decisions while intoxicated. People listening may hear this and ask whether it's possible, but it has been scientifically studied. After you have slept poorly on a consistent basis, for at least 2 weeks according to some accounts, and have also worked more than 12 hours, you are effectively making decisions while drunk. In 2019, I saw a similar figure that had a tremendous impact on me in 2020. I thought it could not possibly be true, but at that time it was close to 87%. When I reviewed it again in 2024, it was 92%. What does that mean? It means we are seeing growth in the wrong direction. When I began interviewing executives, as I mentioned to you, I eventually conducted more than 1,200 interviews, and the figure was 9 out of 10. In other words, 9 out of 10 people had these symptoms. My personal experience and the studies produce very similar figures, George, and those symptoms are practically the 7 I listed. There are more, but I believe those 7 simplify them well. What am I trying to tell you, George? I'm surprised not only by individuals, but also by organizations. They should be placing far greater emphasis on caring for these executives who make decisions in companies.
que están tomando decisiones en las empresas.
I would venture to say that it isn't only that these executives, and perhaps I should include myself in that list, sleep poorly, stand on the verge of burnout, and make decisions as though we were drunk, as you said, and as the studies suggest. We also change. I still include myself here. We become negative people and grow more irritable. We tend to say things we don't want to say or treat other people in ways we don't want to treat them, right? Or we don't want to be treated ourselves either. Do you understand? We end up being hated by the people who are there to help the business succeed simply because we display a completely objectionable attitude caused by poor sleep, extreme stress, 12-hour work days, and so on and so on, all the while believing we're doing the right thing. We believe poor sleep is part of the trophy or part of the prize, part of being successful. I belong to the elite group of people who sleep badly. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Totalmente sentido. Y de hecho,
It makes complete sense, and in fact, and sorry for putting it this way, in the still heavily masculine world of leadership, we reward this. We practically say, you're sleeping badly, you're traveling constantly, wow, you're successful. Here is a question. Some time ago, I posted something on LinkedIn that went very viral. It concerned a person's wife. This came from a conversation with a CEO whose identity I obviously cannot disclose. He was about to turn 54 years old. After our conversation, I said, "Do you realize that your wife misses you when you're at home?" He said, "I don't understand what you're saying, Alfonso." I said, "Look, when you're in your own home, you're a stranger. You're a stranger at home because your life is outside. Your wife and family have grown accustomed to your absence. And when you are there, you're irritable and so on. So in truth, she misses you so much that she wants you to leave." He looked at me and said, "You're very harsh, Alfonso." But he was the one telling me all of this. What I wanted to ask was whether he wanted to keep living that life. Are the most important things those 10, 7, 5, or 3 KPIs that prove you're a star and successful at your company? Or are you also failing to measure the KPIs of your family and your relationship? This is where I begin reflecting. People eventually ask, what is the purpose of everything I'm doing? And that is a question I ask you, George, and the audience. Why are you building what you're building for? Whatever it is you are building, does it have a deeper purpose that nourishes or illuminates someone beyond yourself? In fact, if you'll allow me, George, today happens to be my name day. You can edit this out later if you want, but it is the feast day of Saint Alphonsus Ligori. I'll tell you about this saint because his story is closely connected to all of this. This saint lived around the 1600s. He wasn't a saint at first, of course. He was a successful lawyer who never lost a case. That meant everyone in court feared him at that time, because he was a person who never lost. But he realized that every case he won fed his own ego and his own enjoyment. In other words, he shone a light on himself, but not on others. He dimmed their light because he always won. Until one day he realized he had a talent, and that he could use that talent for others. Once he made that decision, he left his profession and devoted the same talent to accomplishing far more powerful work for other people. I extended that invitation to myself. What is all this success for, Alfonso? Selling millions? Staying in five-star hotels? If the truth was that I returned home to a kind of hell, both for myself, because I was alone with myself, and for the people around me.
Para mí, porque estaba solo conmigo mismo, y para las personas que me rodeaban.
Forgive the long reflection there, George.
No, wonderful, wonderful. I didn't know that. Happy name day, by the way. Yes, many of us justify burnout or justify the symptoms and believe we're fine. No, no, that isn't me. It doesn't happen to me. I'm fine. I have it under control, things like that, right? The important thing for everyone listening is to evaluate themselves. You're going to help us tremendously with that in today's conversation, with how to evaluate ourselves. In fact, your website has a quiz, a questionnaire that takes only 3 minutes. That's how long it took me. It's very quick, an extremely fast assessment, and it costs nothing. On behalf of everyone who's done it, I want to thank you, Alfonso, because it is very useful too. But we need to evaluate ourselves and then ask the following question. Do we have a plan? Is what we're doing today part of that plan? And if the answer is no, and when I refer to a plan, by the way, I mean from today until the day I die. Do I have a life plan? Do I know exactly what the stages of that plan are? Is what I'm doing today one of those stages, or am I here by accident? Am I here because I need to pay the bills, or am I here simply because I need to finance my life? But if I'm here, why am I here? Because I planned it this way, and it's part of my strategy. I'm going to be here for this period of time because afterwards, I have to execute the next stage of my strategy, then the next, and then the next, until I reach the end. If the answer is yes, and you have that plan as clearly defined as a blueprint, wonderful. But I'll also venture a number here. Following the 80-20 rule, I'm sure at least 80% of people are here running, sleeping badly, and doing all of it without a plan. We'll see what happens tomorrow. We'll see how I end up. Hopefully it turns out well. You understand? What have you discovered during all these years of doing this work?
Es brutal la la reflexión que invitas.
That reflection you're inviting us into is powerful, George. Ultimately, we have a plan for everything in life. We're excellent at making all kinds of plans. In fact, we're far better at creating plans for other people. Just think about that. But we don't do it for ourselves. I found one way of looking at myself, and it is this. If the Alfonso from 15 or 20 years ago, that 17 or 15-year-old who still had all those dreams, looked at me today, would he ask me for advice? Or would he distance himself from me? I think that's a beautiful exercise, and I want to share it. Then do the same exercise with 70-year-old Alfonso, just to choose a number. If 70-year-old Alfonso looked at Alfonso today, would he be proud of what he is building, what he is doing, how he leads, how he makes decisions, how he cares for his partner, and how much time he gives his child? So I believe the plan is important. As in business, it matters. But I believe it is even more important that the plan be consistent with what you believe, think, and do. The first question I ask myself is, who am I? And this question, who am I, is one I need to ask myself as an exercise every quarter. Who am I? We seem to know who we are, but we never stop to think about why we make the decisions we make. That is where the why lies, right? Why do we do what we do? Why do we yell at certain people when they care about and love us? Why do we sometimes distance ourselves from our parents because we disagree about things? Why do we do what we do? What am I here for? That is the second question, right? I like these three questions. Who am I? Helps me understand what I'm made of and what software I'm running. Because there is a fact, George, that will blow the minds of the people listening. We have software in our heads, in our minds, the conscious and the unconscious. We operate with the 5% that is conscious, while the unconscious responds to 95% of what happens. And we don't bring it into consciousness because we're running all the time, just as you were saying, right? And concerning that unconscious mind, consider this fact. The software of the unconscious mind is formed largely during the first 6 years of life, George. What does that mean? It means we are repeating patterns formed during our first 6 years. What do I invite people to do with these three very simple questions and with the life plan we discussed? Ask themselves these questions, because the questions will begin to bring that unconscious material to the surface and provide answers about the patterns we have, so we can change them. How do we change them? Well, there are many procedures we can follow, but the first step is recognizing that this unconscious programming is not the software we want to run for the rest of our lives. That is where change begins. And the last of the three questions is, we have, who am I? And where do I come from? Or what am I here for? But the third question would be, where am I going? That is the plan you mentioned, right? The plan can change, because the answer to who am I can give us new information every time we do the exercise, helping us understand ourselves better and build a plan more closely tailored to what we need. It is like going into a company and reviewing its historical sales, seeing how it performed in the past, examining its crises and pivotal moments, and understanding how it developed its DNA and culture. If you have all that information but don't use it in the future, you'll make the same mistake. That is the pattern. We see this in companies because companies are led by people. So the three questions for building that plan are very simple. Who am I, which means understanding ourselves deeply, a process that will last our entire lives. Then in one form or another, what am I here for and where am I going? The third is built on the first two, of course. Ultimately, the only thing that changes is whether we are taking action or merely reacting, George.
Es si nosotros estamos accionando o simplemente reaccionando, George.
Perfectly clear. Let's philosophize for a minute. Why do we run? I was thinking and meditating on this during the week as I was preparing for our conversation. I began asking myself why we run, and I reached a conclusion. Tell me whether you think I'm wrong. I believe what we do, and when I say we, I mean workers all around the world. It's a commodity. Could I do it, or could someone else do it? It makes little difference, in my opinion. One person might do it better than another, but that assessment depends on how you measure it. It depends on the yardstick and on the KPIs. If you reverse the measure, perhaps I did it better. If you measured the other way around, perhaps the other person did it better than me. Therefore, what we call performance is somewhat subjective, even though, of course, it is based on an objective measurement. In the end, what we do is commodity. When you realize that you yourself are a commodity, that creates insecurity. And nothing is more dangerous in a human being's life than feeling insecure. You and I are very confident people. We do this, we speak, we sell whatever you want. We meet with senior leaders, and we're not afraid. Yet, when you realize that you can be replaced, an insecurity attack arrives. And with it comes the urge to shine, to do everything well. never disappoint anyone, and always be the best. To accomplish that, you have to work 12 hours a day. To accomplish it, you have to sleep badly. Because if you sleep well, you don't belong to the group of winners. You aren't welcome in that group. You have to sleep badly. See what I'm saying? On Monday, someone asks, "How was your night?" And you say, "Terrible, I didn't sleep well at all." Then you are welcome into the elite group. Yet, a small group of people manages to work only a few hours, remain highly effective. They succeed at whatever it is they do and be successful and happy at the same time, both themselves and the people around them. Have they discovered a magic formula, or do they simply know how to tell things apart? Turn off the switch and give value to what you were saying. What am I here for? Why am I here? And where am I going? They understand how to value their place in history, in my opinion. This is my place in history, and this is my mission. This is what I came here to do, and that is where I'm going. Therefore, I cannot devote myself only to today. I also have to devote myself to tomorrow. I'm philosophizing here, right?
Me gusta.
I like it. I'm going to move into sales for a moment and then return to philosophy, okay?
La filosofía, ¿no?
In my experience, the best salespeople are not those who work the most.
No son los que trabajan.
The best salespeople are those who build relationships, build trust, and connect with both the product they sell and the person sitting across from them.
Confianza.
Ultimately,
Los que se conectan.
I think you know this better than I do because you've worked in organizations far larger than mine and have led teams. That the best projects, deals, and contracts ultimately close because of trust between people.
Equipos
Quality obviously matters, as do many other necessary factors, but as you said,
se cierran en confianza en
when the competitors are at the same level,
mandan un montón
your relationship with a prospective buyer or company is what ends up determining the outcome.
de potencia
That is where I saw the best salespeople.
con el potencial comprador,
In fact,
etcétera.
in my own case, I used to joke that I was competing against
Ahí
Goliaths.
donde yo vi los mejores vendedores.
Our company was small. We had, of course, partners at that time, along with brush turbo generators and others, but we competed against the giants, General Electric, Siemens, and others.
Como Brash y otros.
The question was how a young man born in 1987 in the north, in the small city of Salto, could beat those monsters.
Chiquita.
And I realized I could not compete by being just like them.
Monstruos.
I invite everyone to apply this philosophy, whether as salespeople or simply as people who possess something unique.
Como todos tenemos
Let's say we are commodities, but we have a distinguishing quality we can leverage.
un diferencial.
In my case, well, I don't know whether you remember, I would give people alfajores, something very typical from my country. And sometimes I would bring them mate.
Llevaba mates.
I would have trusting conversations with them that allowed me to bring back a great deal of information.
Que a mí me permitió
I didn't do it with that specific intention. My intention was simply to become closer to them.
acercarme.
Over time, because it took time, particularly with Chileans,
Especialmente
that helped me earn enough trust that they would call me before issuing a tender.
llamaran a Andrés las licitaciones.
Alfonso, we have this coming up. Can you help us prepare the specifications? So, within this philosophy, I want to respond to something very important you said.
Que tú dijiste.
We may be commodities and we may be replaceable, but not in every role.
En tu
At
caso,
home, as a spouse, as a son, and as a father, you are not replaceable.
reemplazable.
So, my great question within this business and personal philosophy is why don't you place your energy and the important things in your life at the top of your calendar, precisely where you are not replaceable? At home, in your community, with your friends,
¿Qué es en tu
you are not replaceable there.
entorno? Con tus amigos.
At the company, as you said, for better or worse, especially in the largest companies, you are a number.
Dijiste bien, mal o bien.
Whether you like it or not, call yourself whatever number you want. Number 5, number 3, number 2, or number 1.
El mes o el cinco,
You are still a number.
o el uno.
So within this philosophy, I like to say there are places where we are not replaceable.
Me gusta decir
And
eso,
those are the
porque
people and places waiting for us at home after that
y
success.
esos son los que nos esperan después de ese éxito en casa.
That is where self-discovery comes in, and I draw an analogy or a parallel with San Alfonso's, whom you mentioned earlier. When someone discovers their purpose in life, that is when they say, yes, I'm a commodity, except in this case, in my mission. In this, I am irreplaceable because this is what I came here to do. It can take many years. Some people discover it early, some others discover it later. Some other people never discover it. Discovering your purpose is not easy. I'm sure there are tools and methods and to help you and everyone else discover it. But the day you do, you know it. It is like a eureka moment. Wow, this is my purpose. Your heart pounds, not from stress, but from passion. And you feel excited. That is when the plan is born. From that point on, everything I do has to do with that in mind because that is my purpose. That is when stress levels change and become levels of enjoyment and joy. So, Alfonso, I always ask my guests whether they prefer tea or coffee, but in your case, I won't ask you that question because I know that you prefer mate, right?
Es un híbrido.
Yes, mate. I'd say it's a hybrid of the two because it's more like tea than coffee. But yes, mate is always with me.
Siempre.
I was in Montevideo recently, by the way, and I have another trip planned for the future, this time not for work, but for pleasure. I'm going to Montevideo and to Punta del Este with a mission to visit an important winery. I won't name it so I don't break any rules, but I plan to visit a very important winery near Punta del Este. Well, Alfonso, between mates and wine, time has flown by. I would like to propose that we end here part number 1 of this interview, and I invite all our listeners to continue enjoying this fun conversation in the second part. See you soon.
Perfect, George. Thanks for the invitation, and we'll continue soon.
And that's a wrap. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Leading Sales. Please make sure to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite platform. And don't forget to visit our page, leadingsales-podcast.com, for more resources on the art, science, and the dynamics between leadership and sales. Until our next episode.
Produced by G&P Digital Services.